Hello and welcome to the channel. Today's video is going to be a bit different from my usual ones, but the topic I want to talk about today is one that I'm quite interested in, and I wanted to share some research and some thoughts on the subject, and more importantly I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the subject as well. So at the time of recording this video, I've been finishing up the recording for what will be my debut EP, which has got me thinking about the next steps once I'm done with the mixing. Now, because it's my debut EP, I'd be interested in releasing it in some sort of physical format rather than just the usual digital format that I release my music in. But obviously, to release in a physical format, that requires quite a lot of investment, which then makes you think, is the physical format still relevant today in 2024? So that's what we're going to investigate today. So we'll start this off with what I think most people today think of when they think of physical music, and that is vinyl. I don't think it's much of a secret that vinyl has seen a resurgence over the last few years, and that's definitely something that the market data backs up too. In 2023, so last year, the vinyl market saw its 16th year of consecutive growth, with 5.9 million units sold. This marks the highest number of sales since 1990. That's for the UK market, but the US market shows a very similar story, as you can see in this graph that I'm throwing up on the screen now. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the vinyl market these days, you might just think, well, these will just be old albums that are being reissued and things like that. But it's quite nice to see that this isn't the case. In 2023, the top 3 best-selling vinyls were 1989 by Taylor Swift, Hackney Diamonds by the Rolling Stones, and Did You Know There's a Tunnel Under Ocean Boulevard by Lana Del Rey. All of these are albums that have been released in the same year. Now, going further down this list, you do start to see albums such as Rumours by Fleetwood Mac, or one of my favourites, Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd, but that's to be expected. These are huge iconic albums that have sold hundreds of thousands, if not millions of copies. On the subject of Dark Side of the Moon, I think even if you're not a rock or prog or Pink Floyd fan, it's still one that you should own if you have a record player, because just the artwork alone on the big sleeve, that's just iconic, isn't it? Vinyl single sales also do very well, with things like Now and Then by the Beatles being the best seller of 2023, but you've also got a lot of artists such as Boy Genius and Aphex Twins in the top 20 of single sales as well, so modern stuff as well. Like I said earlier, I think the attraction to vinyl is the large format. I know plenty of people that don't even have a record player that have bought vinyl just to have their favourite albums and the artwork on a big scale. And then when it does come to listening to vinyl as well, with it being analog, it has a different experience to just listening to it on your phone. When you get the vinyl crackle and stuff, it adds something, and it's a different experience to just listening to music on Spotify. So moving on to really what replaced vinyl, that being the cassette tape. Now, depending on the sources you look at, some places will say that there's also a resurgence coming in cassette tapes. And if you just look at the numbers on face value, it would suggest that. In the UK in 2023, 136,000 cassettes were sold, and that's the 4th year in a row that cassette sales have hit 6 figures. However, looking at the actual numbers, in 2023 there was 136,000 sold, as I said. In 2022, that number was almost 200,000. Now, the market is seeing a number of portable cassette players becoming available at affordable prices, so it might still be the case that this is a growing market once again. And I think it does have a charm like vinyl does, in the sense that it's an analog format and it's a retro form factor. It's something very heavily, or for at least for my generation, that's very heavily associated with the 80s and the early 90s. So if you're into that kind of vibe, again, that is an attractive factor to it. Now, this is one that's definitely interesting to me because tape reproduction and replication, whatever you want to call it, getting your music put onto cassette tapes, is much cheaper than setting up all the presses and stuff for vinyl. So for me as a small artist who doesn't have much of a budget for producing physical music, this is much more achievable. It's just a question of whether A, is it going to be a market that continues to grow like my vinyl has, and also, is it something that I will be able to sell with a small audience, or is it too much of a niche thing? I think it's quite early to say, and it definitely doesn't have the same reach or popularity as vinyl does at the moment, but we'll see what happens, I guess. Moving on to the final thing, and it's what, if you're around my age, you probably will have grown up with, that being CDs. Now, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that CDs are very much a dying market. In 2023, in the UK, CD sales fell 6.9%, which is the lowest level of decline since 2015, but it's still a decline. In the US, it's a very similar story, and I'll throw up on screen the graph I'm looking at right now, which just shows you how much the levels have fallen off since the peak around 1999 and 2000 to where we were in 2022 with sales. I mean, it's a night and day difference. Now, I know with CDs there is the argument of, well, at least you own your music then, and it's not just relying on a service like Spotify and you have something for your money. And I do get that, but for me personally, as someone who has quite a big vinyl collection, I would rather spend that money on vinyl because you get a slightly different experience. My personal view on CDs is that they are a format that will die and probably won't make a comeback in the same way. As I was saying earlier with vinyl and cassette, they are analog, so they provide you with a different listening experience as well as having a different form factor, whereas with a CD, it's just a way of transporting digital files. So assuming you're using a lossless streaming service, you're not getting any different of an experience with a CD that you would compared to Spotify. And I think that's the issue and why CDs won't make a comeback. There is the potential of the nostalgia, especially for people my sort of age and who were born in the late 90s that grew up with CDs. I guess that could be a factor. But then when you look at cassettes and vinyls, I wouldn't say that those people who did grow up with cassette and vinyl are the driving force between the market resurgences. But yeah, so those are my thoughts on really, for a smaller artist at least, what would be the three main considerations or mediums to consider when you're talking about producing some physical music. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments, because I'd be really interested to get some other opinions on this. Are you someone that collects vinyl or cassettes or even CDs, or are you purely on streaming services? And what is it about whatever you use that makes you stick with that thing? As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.